Tonight on Primetime, President Trump extends the ceasefire but won't end the blockade. Iran is calling that an act of war, while uncertainty grows over whether talks in Islamabad will even go ahead. So is the next escalation inevitable? Good evening. US President Donald Trump says he will extend the ceasefire with Iran until talks between them have progressed. Vice President J.D. Vance was due to head to Islamabad to head the negotiations, but the White House told reporters yesterday that he will no longer be going. The continued blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is raising fresh doubts about both sides' commitment to de-escalation after Trump said it will not be lifted. Here's more.
The United States has extended its two-week ceasefire with Iran just hours before it was set to expire. President Donald Trump announced the decision, saying the pause will continue while Iran's leadership works on a unified proposal for talks. In a post on Truth Social, Trump also said Iran wants the Strait of Hormuz reopened to avoid losing oil revenue. However, he made clear the US will keep it totally blockaded, even as ceasefire talks continue. According to Trump, the move came after requests from Pakistan's military and political leadership. He said that Washington is willing to wait for diplomacy, but remains prepared for action if needed. The US military will also maintain its blockade of Iranian ports during this period. Iran, however, has sharply criticized the blockade. In his ex-post, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called it an act of war and a violation of the ceasefire. He warned that Iran would defend its interests and resist pressure. Some Iranian officials have gone further. An advisor to the Iranian parliament speaker said the blockade should be met with a military response, dismissing the ceasefire extension as meaningless. Meanwhile, uncertainty surrounds a planned second round of talks between the two sides in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Iran has not yet confirmed its participation, citing what it calls inconsistent US actions. Pakistani officials say they are continuing efforts to bring both sides to the table.
Well, Iran has confirmed it will not take part in the second round of talks with the United States in Pakistan that was due Wednesday, calling the decision definitive, according to Iran's Tasnim news agency. Well, Tehran says the move is meant to fully safeguard its national interests. On Tuesday, a foreign ministry spokesman cited contradictory messaging from Washington along with its actions as reasons behind the decision. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said he would extend the current ceasefire, which was set to expire on Wednesday night. Well, the White House also confirmed that Vice President J.D. Vance will not travel to Pakistan, adding that any updates on face-to-face US-Iran talks will be announced. Well, for more on this, we're joined now by our Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orkan Amashov. Orkan, always great to have you in the studio with us. Mixed signals all over the place here, isn't it? How significant, though, do you think this decision is to extend the ceasefire?
And also, the United States have extended it indefinitely. They've not really mentioned any particular deadline. Deadlines are all negotiable. They're not set in stone. We all understand that particular reality. But I think that as I understand, this is probably going to last for 72 hours. It's a period during the course of which United States, confidently, the government expects, not confidently, but with a degree of hope perhaps, to formulate a unified proposal regarding those 10-point plan or 15-point plan. There have been a wide range of views about whether it's 10-point plan or 15-point plan, but basically they're all hinging and contingent upon 5 key parameters. One is, as we know, despite the fact that the United States have been very adamant about destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities beyond any doubt back last year as a result of 12-day war, we know that 440 kilogram stockpile of enriched uranium happens to be within the borders of Iran. And key point is that enriched uranium should be identified and then should be given to a third country, Russia perhaps, Russia was mentioned in this particular context, or to United States or any other perhaps international organization. This is one particular moment. Iranians do not want to relinquish this. And of course, naturally, the naval blockade is to be lifted according to Iranian point of view, which US is not going to do. What we're observing regarding Strait of Hormuz and beyond is a double blockade, basically.
Yes.
So effectively, Iran is applying this, as we mentioned on a number of occasions, selective regime regarding certain vessels, letting them pass through in return for financial contribution, of course, and US targeting those very vessels sanctioned by Iran, not just in the vicinity of Strait of Hormuz, but anywhere on the high seas. So, and also any vessel entering and leaving the Strait of Hormuz, or any Iranian port, so basically talking at departing Iranian port, is under scrutiny, and United States targeting them. So basically we've got double blockade, and both sides are playing on their strengths. Of course, Iran does fully understand that continuation of the current semi-blockade is not beneficial for US allies, and there's a massive pressure on US, not just from the Gulf countries, but also from major European allies of the United States, and US fully understands that. Naturally, Iran currently, after all that devastation that we have witnessed, is relying on the money that it gets from that particular choke point and control over that choke point. So they're playing on their strengths. You remember last time when we were having this chat, I said that I referred to George W. Bush, who once said that it feels like a rerun of a bad movie.
Yes.
I think my view has not changed in any dramatic way since our last conversation.
No, and that was also a conversation the first time you used the expression double blockade as well. So double blockade, as you say, ceasefire at the same time. We use this term mixed signals, but perhaps it's not mixed signals, Orkan. Perhaps this is just part of a careful, cautious, necessary strategy.
I think it's a carefully constructed mixed signaling. This is not a mixed signaling because it happens by mistake, or it's by design. It is intended to be mixed in order to produce desired impact. Whenever United States wants other countries to feel concerned about what's happening, President Donald Trump is using very bombastic and incredibly concerning language. This language, for all of its unorthodox content, still, I suppose, in line with the US foreign policy. What he said 2 weeks ago about one civilization would die, of course, naturally, it was originally would have been understood by many people as attack on Iran's energy infrastructure, complete devastation. But what he also achieved by that, all the world perceived Iran as not just a signature of the world's attention, but also something that everybody else must be involved. Because President Donald Trump effectively is saying that, yes, we're attacking Iran, and you will be grateful to us, because Iran is a danger. It's a country with nuclear ambitions. They are very tough negotiators. The only way we can deal with them is by means of application of force. But when it comes to closure of the Strait of Hormuz, everybody else should be involved in that process in terms of achieving its opening. So that language meant others to be concerned, forced them into action. To a certain extent it produced that impact, to a certain extent it didn't produce. Some other people, as I mentioned last time, who are conspiratorially minded would say that it meant to produce some impact in the markets and so forth. So, and Iran using the same sort of language. They are using this particular mixed signals in order to make sure they're able to maintain their dignity.
Yes.
In the first place, it is a message to the internal audience, but at the same time, it's about conditions. They want naval blockade to be lifted, and they effectively saying that we are open to negotiations, but only if you change your terms. So that's also part of that mixed signaling.
Do you think this double blockade, Orkan, makes diplomatic progress impossible, or can we make progress diplomatically sort of whilst the blockade is sort of slightly compartmentalized, if you like?
Yeah, it seems to be very compartmentalized in many ways. I mean, Pakistan's role is absolutely admirable, but it's a very strange situation. We have what we call ceasefire, and ceasefire effectively means something. It means that airstrikes have stopped. Iran is not being bombarded by Israeli and United States missiles, but effectively it means that there we have degree of ceasefire, but the confrontation has moved from air onto the high seas, into the area of Strait of Hormuz and its vicinity. That makes diplomacy very, very challenging because, first of all, they don't talk to each other directly. We've got mediator there, and it's an indirect bilateral talk involving third parties. It's a very mixed, sort of very complicated situation. It isn't very clear what the United States wants to attain regarding the government existing in Tehran, but there's one particular element which is more or less discernible, and we can talk about it in depth. I suppose, unlike Israelis, who made it very clear that if Iran does not come up with a unified proposal until the end of this month, they will resume their airstrikes on Isfahan and other nuclear sites in order to finish the job, as they say. Also, we have to bear in mind that any attack on Israel from southern Lebanon may also create a new wave of attacks on Iran as well, because these processes are interconnected, whether we like it or not. But the reality is that the United States wants to achieve a compromise with Iran. And that is the reason why President Donald Trump quite often uses the word new regime in Tehran. It gives an indication that we may not like you, you are deeply problematic, Israel will never agree with this on this subject. We may have a sensible conversation and attain a deal, and you will be able to recover your economy as long as you are completely deprived of your nuclear capabilities. There are two things there which must happen, or maybe three things perhaps. One thing from the US position, the transfer of the 440 kilogram stockpile of enriched uranium. This is absolute must. This is something which United States have known about since 12-day war, because when they said about destruction of Iran's nuclear capabilities, that was not complete destruction. That 440 kilogram stockpiles of nuclear enriched uranium is a reason why Iran still capable of producing that sort of atmospherics in the light of which it will be perceived to be a source of danger from the US perspective. Number two, of course, International Atomic Agency people should be able to enter the country, and for 20-year period, Iran should not be allowed to enrich any uranium beyond 3.5% or 3.6%, basically to create a generational break. Iran does not agree to those things. They negotiate, they prevaricate. US does understand that. Although Trump's team are full of entrepreneurially driven, very smart people, but the Iranians are not being defeated by them in the department of intellectual subtlety either. So that's the reality.
It's very interesting. And with regards to the talks, J.D. Vance was going to Islamabad. Now he's not going. What can we expect from the talks in Islamabad?
I think that, first of all, we're not entirely sure whether the talks will happen or not. Probably they will not happen. We expect an extension, which was announced. That extension of ceasefire does not remove the element of blockade. Double blockade will remain there. So ceasefire applies to airstrikes, to some other measures, to ground invasion, of which many people have been talking about, which hasn't happened as yet. It does apply to the airstrikes and other related elements. So we'll have a ceasefire extended for a couple of days, the continuation of the self-same, basically, with the double blockade principles being applied as well. Iran applying its own selective regime, with the United States treating any Iran-sanctioned vessel as its target, basically seizing them, and anywhere on the high seas, including in the vicinity of Strait of Hormuz, and that will continue for a couple of days. If they agree on something after a couple of days, that will be the first 45-day period, interim ceasefire followed by framework. But my feeling is that things will collapse by end of April, and we may witness the beginning of a new confrontation, a new stage in this confrontation, the last stage of which actually started on the 28th of February.
Wow, so fine. So your sense, Orkan, is that actually confrontation is much more likely than moving towards a deal? Because
Iran has not been compelled into submission. Surrender deal has not been issued. It's capable of prevaricating, and President Donald Trump is under massive pressure. He cannot afford resumption of military confrontation in the way and form that it happened a few weeks ago. That gives Iran a degree of leverage that they have been using very wisely. But I think that the balance, the equilibrium, this fragile equilibrium which has given rise to this tactical pause, which we call ceasefire with elements of double blockade attached to it, will only last for a couple of days probably, and by the end of April, things may go beyond control again. And I also would like to take into account the fact that Israel is still there. Israel is not part of these negotiations. Israel treats its confrontation with Hezbollah south of the Litani River as a separate matter.
Yes.
However separate this may be, if US and Iran fail to agree on Iran's obligation to stop feeding its proxies, including Hezbollah and Houthis in Yemen, this effectively creates a new situation wherein Israel will be more proactive, because Israel has got its own deadline. They're saying that we are not bound by a Trumpian deadline, and for them what matters is a result. And if they see that the unified proposal has not been produced by Iran, they may enter the fray again. And allow me also add that there's another element, because as I mentioned, Israeli position is quite different, but I suppose President Donald Trump fully understand the complexities involved inside Iran's establishment. There seems to be, on the basis of what we have heard, degree of sympathy towards Mr. Galibaf, who former, the Speaker of the Parliament, incumbent Speaker of the Parliament, and he believes that there is a fracture there. He expects some Iranians come to conclusion and to formulate a consolidated approach. So he wants to have a deal with somebody in Iran. He made it very clear over the past couple of days and weeks that he doesn't believe that the son of the former Shah is a man to be trusted, or a man who can actually reasonably be expected to pull the strings in Iran at some point soon. Therefore, I think he wants somebody to emerge, to have a deal, to ensure US interests being secured, but Israel does not want that, of course. And that dichotomy, I think, has revealed itself in the clearest possible way over the past couple of days, including those last days that we have been able to witness.
Fascinating analysis, as always, Orkan. We're very grateful to you. Thank you very much.
To you.
Thank you. Renewed tensions along the Israel-Lebanese border have become, as Lebanon's Prime Minister insists his government is pursuing diplomacy while refusing to be intimidated. The flare-up follows fresh exchanges of fire that are testing a fragile ceasefire just days before talks resume.
Tensions between Israel and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah have flared again despite a fragile ceasefire, as both sides accuse each other of violations ahead of renewed US-mediated talks. Hezbollah said it fired rockets and launched drones toward northern Israel on Tuesday, calling the attack a response to what it described as repeated Israeli breaches of the truce, including strikes on civilian areas in southern Lebanon. The group said it targeted an Israeli artillery position it blamed for the attacks. The Israeli military confirmed rockets were fired at its troops operating in southern Lebanon, describing the incident as a blatant violation of the ceasefire. Sirens sounded in several northern Israeli communities, but no casualties were reported. The escalation comes just days after a 10-day ceasefire brokered by Washington took effect. Despite the agreement, Israeli forces remain deployed in a security zone several kilometres deep inside southern Lebanon, which Israel says is necessary to protect its northern areas from further attacks. Speaking alongside French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris, Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said his government is committed to negotiations but will not be intimidated.
Cela dit, on ne cherche pas la confrontation.
That said, we're not seeking a confrontation with Hezbollah. On the contrary, I'd prefer to avoid a confrontation with Hezbollah, but believe me, we won't be intimidated, not by Hezbollah and certainly not by those who are blowing the hot and cold air of civil war.
Diplomatic efforts are continuing in parallel. A second round of ambassador-level talks between Israel and Lebanon is expected to take place in Washington later this week.
Well, to help us unpack these latest developments, we're joined now by Mohammed Ali Zafar, research scholar at the University of Oxford, who's closely monitoring the situation in the Middle East. Mohammed, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Great to have you back on the show. Just set the scene for us then. How serious is this latest flare-up on the Israel-Lebanon border?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's good to be back. I think what is happening right now is an interesting development because everyone wants to see it as a situation that is isolated from the the broader efforts in Middle East to see peace. But I see it as interlinked, and I think what is happening in Iran, U.S. talks will have repercussions for the Lebanese talk with Israel as well. Although there are prospects that the second round of negotiations will be held, and also regarding the Lebanon-Israel talks in Washington. So we must remain hopeful. But looking at Israel's actions in southern Lebanon and the presence of Israeli forces, as well as its actions to destroy bridges and hire contractors to demolish the civilian infrastructure in the in South Lebanon, that shows that Israel will really need to revert back from any, by giving major concessions to Lebanon in this regard. But for now, the situation shows that the talks will be tough for both sides.
And what do we know about the build-up, the incidents that triggered this latest exchange?
I think one of the important reasons is that the truce between Iran and US, that is linked to this conflict as well. Because while Israel and US believe that Lebanon was not part of the deal, there seems to be some sort of a disagreement between US and Iran in this regard. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why we see that Hezbollah is not willing to back down. On the other side, Israel also does not want to stop the occupation at this moment in terms of its, its grand designs in the Middle East. So I think from that point of view, Israel is trying to make sure that it remains relevant in this conflict, and by flaring up the conflict from both sides, from Hezbollah and from Israel, it shows that both are trying to flex their muscles and show their relevance in the negotiation process between Iran and US, because for now they are kept aside from that negotiation, and that is something that is probably hurting Israel as well, and also Hezbollah, because both are concerned about what will the talks between US and Iran will lead to, because the decision in that talk will have major impact on the future of Hezbollah as well as for Israel's aggression in southern Lebanon.
Yeah, indeed, flexing their muscles, showing their relevance, as you say. But how fragile do you think the current ceasefire is based on what we're seeing?
Well, definitely, this ceasefire is fragile, no doubt about it, because the talk is going to be about how far the Lebanon's government is willing to disarm Hezbollah. Now, that's a pressing concern because Lebanon's army is weak. And, these efforts to disarm Hezbollah is not just Lebanon's cup of tea at the moment, and it requires broader discussions about how will Hezbollah be disarmed. And the other thing is that Israel has serious control over the southern Lebanon, and is that the finance minister of Israel said that he wants the extension of Israeli borders as well. When the officials are saying that they want to, control till Latino River, that shows that it's planned some sort of shows a claim or a similar mimicry of what happened in Gaza as well. So Israel has some broader plans for southern Lebanon, and it will really be a difficult discussions between US and Israel officials how far US is able to convince Israel that it really needs to move back from its understanding that it has developed a yellow line in Lebanon and move back to the established borders of between Israel and Lebanon.
There are so many public statements, press releases, comments from government officials on social media. It's often hard to understand, Mohammed, isn't it? What's really going on diplomatically? What role for ongoing diplomacy talks at the moment? What role is official diplomacy actually playing?
Well, diplomacy is just buying time for both sides at this moment, because as I mentioned, the things on the ground do not look as simple as it appears. Either it is about US-Iran negotiations or Lebanon and the negotiation between Lebanon and Israel. From both point of view, diplomacy is just allowing them to make sure that they sit together, and if there is a broader discussions about peace in Middle East, then there could be solution to it. But the complexity of the conflict at this time between Lebanon and Israel shows that it is not just based on these two sides to find a solution. Rather, the US will have an important role in convincing both sides that this sort of plan is in place, whatever that will appear to be after the rounds of negotiations that will in Washington, and we'll start seeing results. But for now, what we really want is peace to prevail in South Lebanon, because there have been huge displacement and of people, and people are just moving out of South Lebanon. Then bridges have been destroyed in South Lebanon, making sure the Israel is making sure that definitely Israel's concerns are valid about Hezbollah, but the other thing is that the destruction it has caused in Lebanon is making it really difficult for the people to stay in southern Lebanon.
And what about the role of France in all this? We've heard some interesting comments from Monsieur Macron. We know, of course, there's a historic relationship between France and Lebanon. What do you expect next from France?
Well, one of the things could be an offer to be party to any discussions about finding peace, and if we see that that's obviously one of the scenarios where France will take an active role. Considering what has happened between the support that transatlantic partnership is, especially with NATO member states not support to U.S. Objectives in Iran, and Donald Trump saying that he got a call from Secretary NATO's head secretary, and said that they want to help, while Trump says that he does not need the help of NATO. So this shows that probably in this situation, irrespective of any support from France or other parties who want to really play an active role, Trump will probably not want any third party at this stage to take credit for any intent to achieve, because Trump understands that if there is an understanding between Iran and the Middle East, then the issue of Lebanon can easily be solved. It is only going to be a difficult decision between US and Israel, that the US convinced Israel to halt its aggression in southern Lebanon.
And finally, I just wanted to get your sense of what we should be watching out for in the coming days. Key metrics, key statements, key indicators.
I think one of the most important things will be the Twitter account of Donald Trump. If he is willing to extend ceasefire in southern Lebanon, as he did in the Iran-US conflict on the request of Pakistan's Prime Minister, I think that's one of the things we would need to look into. The other thing is we hope that there is no cross-firing between Israel and Hezbollah, and this peace for the 10 days actually lead to some sort of pragmatism to prevail between the negotiations that are going to be held in Washington. That's one thing we really need to look into. But if both sides do not maintain the ceasefire and continue with the aggression, it will really lead to a larger catastrophe for the people in southern Lebanon.
Mr. Zafar from Oxford University, we really appreciate your analysis. Thank you for joining us on Primetime. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories shaping the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Shaken to its very foundation. As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. AnewZ is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on AnewZ.
A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Now, Andy Mioch is with us, bringing us the very latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, oil prices are rising as the situation in the Middle East remains highly volatile. The European Commission came out with a plan to cushion some of the energy fallout. Airlines across the globe are canceling flights due to the jet fuel price surge. The UK recorded a higher rate of inflation, and Russians confirmed a halt to Kazakh oil flows to Germany. So let's dive straight in. First up, international benchmark Brent crude reversed an earlier dip and is trading closer to $100 a barrel. This follows reports of new attacks on cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz after the U.S. President Donald Trump unilaterally extended the ceasefire between the United States and Iran.
Brent crude oil futures rebounded to around $100 per barrel on Wednesday after renewed attacks on shipping near Iran. Maritime authorities said a Liberia-flagged container vessel was fired on by a gunboat linked to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. In a separate incident, another 2 outbound cargo ships were also targeted. The attacks mark the latest escalation in the region as tensions over the waterway remain high. Earlier, Iran indicated it had received signals that the US may be open to ending its blockade, potentially reopening talks, while President Donald Trump extended a ceasefire, but warned restrictions would remain until negotiations conclude. Iran has said it will not reopen the strait while US naval interceptions continue. The ongoing disruption is contributing to severe supply concerns, with estimates of demand destruction nearing 4 to 5 million barrels per day, or about 5% of global supply, with Asia most affected.
Meanwhile, Russia confirmed it will divert oil supplies from Kazakhstan, previously intended for Germany via the Druzhba pipeline, to other routes. Berlin earlier said that Kazakh crude might stop flowing to one of Germany's largest refineries from May 1st.
Russia will divert oil supplies from Kazakhstan, previously intended for Germany via the Druzhba pipeline, to other routes starting from May 1st, Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said on Wednesday. Novak said the logistical change was due to technical possibilities and had been agreed with Kazakhstan. Earlier on Wednesday, Germany's economy ministry said it has been informed that no Kazakh crude oil may reach the northeastern PCK Shvet refinery from May. The ministry added that even in such a scenario, the production of petroleum products was not at risk. 3 industry sources had told Reuters on Tuesday that Russia is set to stop oil exports from Kazakhstan via the Druzhba pipeline, which would directly hit PCK, one of Germany's biggest refineries that also supplies Berlin. Supplies to Germany have been carried over a northern section of the pipeline, separate from the southern one that supplies Hungary and Slovakia. The ministry said the absence of Kazakh oil deliveries to the refinery did not ultimately jeopardize the security of supply of petroleum products in Germany.
Over in Brussels, the European Commission set out plans to cut electricity taxes and coordinate the summer refill of countries' gas storage in an effort to deal with the energy fallout from the Iran war. The Commission has described the measures as a toolbox to bring immediate relief to European households and industries.
The European Commission set out plans on Wednesday to cushion the energy fallout from the Iran war. It's to cut electricity taxes and coordinate the summer refill of countries' gas storage. The published plans show the EU will, for now, avoid major market interventions such as capping gas prices or taxing energy companies' windfall profits. It used those measures in 2022 when Russia cut gas supplies and prices hit record highs. The Commission will publish legal proposals to change the tax rules in May. Tax changes require unanimous approval from EU countries, making them difficult to pass. Europe's heavy reliance on oil and gas imports has left it exposed to spiralling prices, particularly since the Strait of Hormuz, a vital fuel shipping route, was effectively closed. European gas prices have increased by a third since the US-Israeli war with Iran began at the end of February. Still, gas prices remain far below 2022 levels, and so far, the Iran crisis has not triggered fuel shortages in Europe.
A surge in jet fuel prices driven by the US-Israeli war on Iran has upended the global aviation industry. One of Europe's major airline groups, Lufthansa, announced it had cancelled 20,000 flights between May and October to try and save fuel.
There are extensive flight cancellations.
Lufthansa has said 20,000 short-haul flights are being cut from its schedule this summer, allowing it to save on the soaring cost of jet fuel. Most of the cuts come from closing its loss-making CityLine fleet and retiring its 27 aircraft. It blamed the cost of jet fuel, which it said had more than doubled, as well as labour disputes with its workforce. Most airlines are dealing with soaring costs as Middle East oil supplies remain largely cut off due to the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz. Consumers are also feeling the pinch, with ticket prices starting to show significant rises. The head of the International Energy Agency also told Associated Press last week that Europe had maybe 6 weeks of jet fuel left. In a statement on Tuesday, Lufthansa said the 20,000 culled flights would save 40,000 tonnes of jet fuel over the period until October, adding that the cuts only represented 1% of its available seat kilometres.
UK inflation accelerated to 3.3% in March after the Iran war triggered the biggest jump in fuel prices in more than 3 years. That's according to official data showing the first impact on prices from the Middle East conflict.
British inflation rose to 3.3% in March from 3% in February, according to data showing the first impact on prices from the Iran war, which the Bank of England fears could lead to a return of the country's persistently high inflation problem. The prices paid by factories for their inputs jumped by much more than expected. The figures from the Office for National Statistics also showed on Wednesday. Economists said the increases, driven largely by fuel, were unlikely to push the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee into raising interest rates at next week's meeting. The price of motor fuels jumped by 8.7% on the month. That was the biggest rise since June 2022, shortly after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The data showed services price inflation rose unexpectedly to 4.5% from 4.3% in February. But much of that increase was due to a rise in airfares driven by the timing of the Easter holidays. Core inflation, which excludes more volatile food, energy, alcohol and tobacco prices, weakened to 3.1% from 3.2% in February. Britain's inflation rate has been the highest among the group of 7 economies for much of the last 4 years. But last month, the Bank of England sharply increased its inflation forecast due to the energy price shock. The International Monetary Fund last week predicted British inflation would peak at 4% in the coming months.
And finally, over to the food industry. French group Danone said it beat first quarter sales growth expectations despite a baby formula recall and supply disruptions related to the Iran war. The company says it now focuses on restoring trust in the infant formula business.
Danone on Wednesday said it beat first quarter sales growth expectations, though a European baby formula recall and supply disruptions related to the Iran war weighed on its specialised nutrition business. Shares rose nearly 3% in the wake of the French food group's report. The company, whose brands include Activia yogurt and Evian water, also kept its full-year guidance intact, but it did not quantify how things might improve in the second quarter. Analysts said the company's underperforming US coffee creamer business improved in the first quarter. The US-Israeli war on Iran has disrupted supply chains, including shipments of baby formula imported from Europe that move through the Middle East. Danone's overall business in the region accounts for around 2% to 3% of net sales. The baby formula recall hit companies including Danone in the first quarter. Investors are eager to understand the extent of the financial and reputational impact. Danone, which recalled infant formula products across Europe and the Middle East, said its focus was to restore trust in the infant formula business as the recall situation was going back to normal.
And that will be all in the business brief for tonight. Back to you, Guy.
Fascinating stories as always, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. And after the break, more on the aviation topic. Lufthansa cancelling thousands of those flights as rising geopolitical tensions begin to hit global aviation. Don't go away.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. AnewZ is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on AnewZ.
We are in Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
Mr. President, I want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. More now on Lufthansa and those fuel shortages. Well, Germany's biggest airline says it will cancel around 20,000 flights between May and October this year. Well, the company says this step is needed to save fuel during a global energy crisis, linked obviously to rising tensions involving the United States, Israel and Iran. Well, Lufthansa expects to save more than 40,000 tons of fuel. It says overall efficiency will fall only slightly by less than 1%. The airline plans to reduce short, less profitable routes from Frankfurt and Munich while increasing flights from Zurich, Vienna and Brussels. Lufthansa says it will release the full list of cancelled flights by the end of April and has already started cancelling some flights up until the end of May. Well, to break this down, we're joined now by Samuel de Very Vesterby, Managing Director at the European Neighbourhood Council, joining us from Brussels in Belgium. Samuel, very nice indeed to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us. I mean, this sounds very significant. How major is this decision by Lufthansa to cancel 20,000 flights?
Well, I think it's important to recall that the Straits of Hormuz provided a huge amount of energy importation to Europe, a huge amount in relative terms, of course, meaning we were under the 10% margin in general energy, as the EU has a diversified energy agenda, including LNG from the United States, still imports under 12% from Russia, but it also relied a lot on, of course, Qatar, Azerbaijan and other countries. So the Straits of Hormuz were very important. However, when it comes to fuel specifically, so kerosene, that number was in fact much higher, much closer to 70 or 75%. So what we're seeing in terms of the pinch for aviation is very specific to kerosene, whereas when we look at the energy more broadly, the crisis is less problematic, let's say.
Very interesting indeed. So very, very specific, as you say. Obviously, the geopolitical tensions, the crisis has been a factor driving this. How long do you expect this to go on? Are airlines sort of thinking ahead? Have they worked out a way to manage this medium term if the crisis just seems to continue indefinitely?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to differentiate between two different types of airlines. I mean, first you have state-subsidized airlines like Lufthansa, like ITA Airways, and so forth. And then you, of course, have fully private companies like Ryanair. And I think you will indeed see very different strategies from those different types of airlines and how they cut, and also what kind of subsidies they will get and what kind of support they will get. In second place, I think it's important to mention that, of course, it very much depends on for how long this goes on. We've had a long period of time in which globalization and conflict, especially in places like the Gulf, was very low. And where, kind of NATO allies like the United States provided kind of security for business, whether it was navigation or fuel or supply chains, this was always the main priority. Well, it looks now that the United States and maybe others in the region are more focalized on geopolitical rivalry as opposed to the free flowing of business. And so I think some of these airlines, to answer your question, are trying to think quite long term and will be cutting long term.
And Samuel, what impact have we seen so far on passengers and ticket prices? And what impact do you expect to see over the coming months ahead?
Well, there's going to be a spike in prices. It's already happened. There's already been a spike in prices, which is quite considerable. Some prices internally in Europe are already at somewhere between 80 and 90% higher than before. That will increase continuously. And of course, it will be very dependent also on whether the governments around EU member states are capable of replenishing their oil reserves in terms of stockage of reserves across the European Union. So fuel shortage in the European Union is very dependent on, for example, EU laws that require emergency stocks of up to 90 days of net imports for oil. So depending on how fast they get replenished and depending on how big the demand is, the crisis will either get worse or stagnate.
And of course, everybody will be hoping that their particular route is one of the routes that doesn't get cut. I mean, why is the airline cutting some routes while expanding others?
Well, I mean, this is quite a business-oriented question, but I think the answer to that is quite simple, which is that state-subsidized airlines try to fly very broadly. So, for example, Turkish Airlines or Lufthansa or other state-subsidized airlines fly to many destinations in order to cater for their national connectivity in a region or even globally. And so some of those airlines are not particularly profitable. And that's also the reason why airlines traditionally over a long period of time have difficulty sustaining themselves, regardless of oil crises and so forth. So I think it's quite natural that some of the less sustainable, some of the less used routes will be cut first.
If you don't mind, I might try and sneak in another slightly business-related question. It's something our viewers I think are quite interested in. When all of this eventually is over, this crisis, will there be an expectation, do you think, that Lufthansa and other airlines will then reduce prices down back to normal? Or will there be a sense in which the company will need to have a period of time keeping the prices inflated just to sort of recover commercially?
I mean, I'm very sad to say to the people who are watching this from a business perspective, maybe some of them haven't noticed it yet, but when there is the destruction of oil refineries to the extent that we've seen in the Straits of Hormuz over the past weeks and months, especially with regards to Qatar, it's very, very difficult to see or imagine that there will be a reduction in price in the near future or even medium future, which comes even remotely close to what we used to have before. It's simply not infrastructurally possible at the moment, at least according to most experts who are looking at the damage that's been done in Qatar, but also elsewhere.
And do you think anyone might expect to gain from this? You know, thinking about the train network across Europe, for example.
Well, I mean, it's clear that, I mean, when we look at aviation specifically, we've seen that aviation has been deviated, obviously, from the Gulf, which has become a dangerous area with high insurance premiums and high geopolitical risks. So if you just look at a simple map of where the aviation routes are now being diverted to, many of them are going through the South Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, through Turkey, for example. One of the main beneficiaries, indirect beneficiaries of what's happening in the Gulf is, of course, Turkish Airlines and Istanbul, but also arguably maybe parts of Central Asia, as well as other routes which are essentially circumventing what is becoming now a dangerous area for flights to fly through. In addition, it's also important to say beyond kerosene and aviation, of course, oil exporting and gas exporting nations, which have not been directly hit by the American and Iranian war in the Straits of Hormuz, have also benefited from that. So, for example, oil exporting countries in the South Caucasus like Azerbaijan, Russia also has benefited from higher oil prices, and there are also other nations that have also benefited from it. And the ones that have been the net losers have been countries like China, and to some degree also the European Union, although the Straits of Hormuz have a much higher dependency rate vis-a-vis China than vis-a-vis the EU, for example.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed. I mean, when it comes to other airlines, obviously Lufthansa has been one of the first to, if you like, be brave enough to come out first and start cutting routes. Do you expect many more airlines now will follow suit?
I think it's inevitable. It will very much depend on, first, the airlines that continue to receive very high level of state subsidies and that are willing to continue essentially an unprofitable trajectory. At one point, of course, depending on how much oil reserves and kerosene reserves are replenished, they will simply be forced to cut certain routes, not because of a political or business decision, but simply because of lacking reserves, depending on how quickly they're replenished. I do want to just reiterate once more that this is very specific to kerosene and very specific to aviation. And again, the EU law does require emergency stockage, which at the moment are relatively high. In fact, the crude stockage, I think, was about 270 million barrels, whereas the area where there's slightly less stockage in the EU is on gas.
Mr. De Very Vesterby, it's been great to get your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, after the break, Russia warns it could act to protect its citizens in Moldova's breakaway region. Don't go away.
We are in Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
Mr. President, I want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. AnewZ is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on AnewZ.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to AnewZ, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from
Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for AnewZ.
Welcome back to Primetime. Russia says the safety of its citizens in Moldova's breakaway Transnistria region is under threat and warns it is ready to take all necessary steps to protect them. While Secretary of Russia's Security Council said Moscow would not rule out any options, claiming that more than 220,000 Russian citizens live in the region and are facing risks from actions by Kyiv and Chisinau. Well, a pro-Russian separatist region bordering Ukraine broke away from Moldova in the early 1990s and has remained outside government control ever since. To unpack this, we're joined now by John Kavalik, Senior Editor at Issue Insight. John, always great to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us on Primetime. How significant is this warning by Russia then regarding Transnistria?
Well, we need to take it seriously simply because an official of the government of Russian Federation said it. Mm-hmm. And in his case, he has a military background. The difference here is, unlike Crimea, the armed forces of the Russian Federation could sort of roll right into it. Georgia in 2008 and Ossetia and Abkhazia, they literally could drive right in. This is a little different because to the one side of Transnistria is Ukraine, actually to one side and then the bottom of it, and then the other side is Moldova. So they don't really have an ability to drive in. They'd have to fly in. And there is an airport, but to get there, they'd have to invade or use without permission the airspace of Moldova, the airspace of Ukraine. And so it'd be a little more complicated, but there are roughly, I think, 2,200 troops there now. So it's doable. The question is, how much effort would Ukraine, Moldova, NATO, European Union use to stop it?
John, you've been to Transnistria, we were talking in the break, multiple times. Just give us a sense of what the area is like and just bring us up to speed on what's happening inside there right now.
It's quite interesting. When you drive from Moldova, you get to a checkpoint. It's like a customs. You go in, your passport, they give you a little visa, they can stamp your passport, and then you drive on your way. And you basically go from the 21st century to the 20th century in some respects, because when you arrive, right across the street from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a cafe back to the USSR. And it's just like that from the 1970s. The cars, very much the same. But having said that, they also have some, very fine restaurants. They have a huge operation that produces caviar, and they export it, and ironically through Moldova. They have, some energy production, which they use basically to sell into Moldova, and then Moldova in turn sells them some. So it's not a place where you look around and say, wow, there's a lot of potential here. It's basically a gallery, whether, it's like a museum of natural history. And in this case, though, it still operates, but it generally does because others are supporting it, not because it can support itself. Yes. And it does have issues with young people are leaving because there aren't a lot of opportunities for them. But having said all of that, when you're meeting with government officials, they will put on the performance that all is well and that they are socialists, they are communists, they are the way they were back in the 1970s.
And John, what are your thoughts on the timing of this? Why is Moscow raising concerns about its citizens there now?
In some respects, it's in response to the president of Moldova's recent statement about not only Moldova wanting to become a member of the European Union, and it's important to know that next to Moldova is Romania, and Romania is both a member of the EU and a member of NATO. And Moldova sort of came out of what was Romanian territory. And so she has recently talked about perhaps Moldova rejoining Romania as, in some respects, a fast track for Moldova to then become a member of the EU and de facto a member of NATO. That has spooked the Russians, because at that point you have a much larger footprint for the European Union and for NATO. So I think that some of this was a response to the president's statements. And in addition, when you're in that area, when you're in Transnistria, you can, I've said this to them in the meetings, that you sort of know how this is going to end. You aren't going to be able to continue to survive in the way you say you want to survive, absent reintegration with Moldova. I mean, you just need to, whether it's your energy, whether it's your currency, whether it's your agricultural products, your machinery, you need to re-engage. And their attitude is, somewhat, not dissimilar from the Cubans, which is, we're going to stay because we've got someone, meaning the Russian Federation, that's supporting us just enough so that we can maintain a reality, or we can maintain viability. And the Cubans, that's basically what Venezuela and Russia had been doing for them. So you do get some sense that they want to put on this front that they can stay the way they are, but in the end, everyone knows that they're going to have to be reabsorbed in some manner, and it's a matter of how they make that work. Moldova, at the same time, understands it really can't become a member of the EU or NATO if part of its territory is considered to be occupied. And this goes to similarities with Ukraine, with NATO and European Union, where 20% of the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine is controlled by the Russian Federation, which makes it difficult with respect to the treaties, the bilateral and multilateral agreements for EU and NATO to have as a member a country that's occupied. And so for Moldova, it would be somewhat the same, where you'd have this entity between Ukraine and Moldova, where there are 2,200 Russian troops.
And John, what about these new laws that empower the Russian president to deploy armed forces abroad to protect Russian citizens? I mean, that feels very connected to what's happening here.
Yeah, and it's not, the laws have been updated, but this is something that a head of state or head of government can do absent anything in writing, because politically, you're not going to get a lot of pushback by saying you have launched this special military operation, this whatever you want to call it, to protect your citizens. And so for President Putin, there's no downside for him to be saying, we are going to protect Russians wherever Russians are. So the borders of the Russian Federation, wherever Russians are, that's where our borders are. So now it scares the hell out of everybody else listening to that. But that's basically what he's saying. And so if for the Russian people, he has a lot of elasticity, so he doesn't have a lot of direct responsibility for what he may or may not do. Basically, he can do it and everyone will get pushed along to support it, rather than, let's say, a full democracy. So people they take what he's saying as the head of state saying it, but I go back to the original point, which is they can't drive into Transnistria. They're going to have to fly in, and that means a lot of flights. The Moldovan government has already restricted Russian citizens from entering from Moldova into the area, particularly military people. So, it would be a challenge for the Russians to do it. But at the same time, is NATO going to shoot down, a Russian transport plane delivering military equipment and personnel into that area when Moldova is not a member of the EU nor a member of NATO? And President Putin knows that. So I think sort of the edge goes to President Putin. If he wants to make a show of this, I think he can.
If he wants to, he can. What do you think will happen, John? Do you think this could lead to broader, sort of messy escalation in the region, or do you expect it to be resolved relatively quietly?
I don't think it'll be resolved quietly because there's no interest, there's no benefit to the Russian Federation to settling issues quietly because of the Russia-Ukraine war that's very loud and very visible. And so having that go away politically, militarily, is not something that President Putin can afford to do quietly. It's got to be a show. Very much Trumpian. It's got to be a show. And so I think that we will continue to see, we'll probably see former President Medvedev come out and say some things. You'll see Foreign Minister Lavrov come out and say some things. There may be some visits that are attempted to the area and let the Moldovan government try to prevent them, type of thing. But I think that this is an easy one for them to use for domestic use, and also an easy one to use to rattle everyone else, because it's easy for people to visualize it, and not many people, one, know where it is, care where it is, and they don't see a huge threat. If you're Ukraine, you're thinking something different. But generally, this is going to be something that the Russian government can do if it wants to do, and do visibly, let there be pushback, and then they'll push back on that. So I don't think we should be surprised to see more Russians in the area and visibly in the area.
John, it's always great to have you. Thank you, as always, for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the remaining stories and check in with our correspondents around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Don't go away.
In Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. AnewZ is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on AnewZ.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome to AnewZ, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for AnewZ.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. FBI Director Kash Patel has filed a defamation lawsuit against The Atlantic and its reporter Sarah Fitzpatrick over an article alleging he has a drinking problem that could pose a threat to national security. Well, Patel has denied the claims, saying that while the publication is free to criticize FBI leadership, it crossed a legal line by publishing what he described as a fabricated allegation aimed at forcing him from office. The lawsuit filed in the US District Court for the District of Columbia is seeking $250 million in damages.
I'm on the job. I'm the first one in. I'm the last one out. I'm like an everyday American who loves his country, loves the sport of hockey, and champions my friends when they raise a gold medal and invite me in to celebrate. I've never been intoxicated on the job, and that is why we filed a $250 million defamation lawsuit. And any one of you that wants to participate, bring it on. I'll see you in court.
Well, US President Donald Trump took part in a marathon Bible reading event held in Washington, D.C. The event marked the 250th anniversary of the United States Declaration of Independence and featured continuous scripture readings. In his remarks, Trump read a passage from the Old Testament focused on repentance and divine guidance.
Thus Solomon finished the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all that came into Solomon's heart to make in the house of the Lord, and in his own house he prosperously effected. And the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself for a house of sacrifice. If I shut up heaven, that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land.
Wednesday marks the most demanding leg of Pope Leo's visit to Equatorial Guinea, with the pontiff scheduled to take 3 separate flights across the country in one single day. He is set to meet worshippers in multiple cities while continuing a tour that has firmly placed Africa at the centre of his global mission.
Pope Leo is on the final full day of his African tour, travelling across Equatorial Guinea after departing the island capital, Malabo. His visit to the mainland cities of Mongomo and Bata comes after several days of strong messages delivered across the continent, condemning war, inequality and abuses of power. For many in Equatorial Guinea, the visit carries deep significance, particularly for young people, many of whom are witnessing a papal visit for the first time. For many students, this visit represents something rare and unforgettable.
Honestly, considering that the Pope is a very important figure worldwide, I think his visit to Equatorial Guinea, which is a very small country, I don't really know how to express it, but I'm very happy about it. I'm very happy.
As a young person, it's exciting and a good feeling that the Pope has arrived in Equatorial Guinea. For me personally, it's a privilege because during the previous Pope's visit many years ago, we didn't have the opportunity to witness it. But now we have the privilege of being able to experience the Pope's visit here, so I feel very happy and pleased about it.
We're very excited to have the Pope here. It's the first time he's coming here. For us young people, it's something incredible. We've never had an experience like this before, so we really appreciate it. It's something big, something epic.
In Bata, the pontiff is also expected to visit the site of the 2021 military barracks explosions that killed more than 100 people. A tragedy that deeply shocked the country and remains a symbol of both loss and inequality in the oil-rich nation. The enthusiasm reflects a broader sense of occasion in a country that has only hosted one papal visit before, when Pope John Paul II travelled there in 1982. Pope Leo's trip marks the final stop in a 10-day, 4-country African tour that has taken him to Algeria, Cameroon, Angola, and now Equatorial Guinea, covering nearly 18,000 kilometres and 11 cities.
Mexico has launched launched an investigation into a possible breach of its constitution after it was reported that 2 US embassy officials died in a car accident. Well, the officials were returning from a raid on a drug lab with local officials in the northern part of the country. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum had this to say.
Estamos investigando lo que estaban haciendo estas personas.
We are investigating what these people were doing and which agency they were from. So far, the information we have is that they were indeed working together. Let's put it that way. So the Attorney's Office needs to conduct a full investigation to determine if the Constitution or the national security law was violated, and the Chihuahua state authorities need to provide all the truthful information.
Divisions have emerged within the European Union over the next package of sanctions against Russia. Well, Slovakia has said it will not support new restrictions until Russian oil flows through the Druzhba pipeline are restored. Bratislava has also announced it will not take part in the joint loan initiative for Ukraine.
From January 27th to this day, Ukraine has not permitted it pumping oil through the Druzhba pipeline, which for us is unambiguously a political instrumentalization of this issue on the part of Ukraine. This is also evident from the fact that, following the elections in Hungary, we are now receiving signals that oil supplies may be resumed. We can state that we are prepared to support the 20th sanctions package against Russia, because in our assessment it will not have an impact on the Slovak economy. However, we will only do so once Russian oil arrives via the Druzhba pipeline to Slovakia. For the time being, I can confirm that we have no such information, and I have informed my colleagues in the entire Foreign Affairs Council of this. It is a political decision, stemming from a political decision by President Zelensky not to allow oil through to Slovakia and Hungary. I can only state, on behalf of the Slovak side, a completely clear position. The Slovak Republic is not participating in the loan that will be provided to Ukraine jointly with 2 other countries, namely the Czech Republic and Hungary. By virtue of having approved this loan at the European Council in December on the understanding that we would not be co-participating in it, this matter is closed for us. It is a question for the others. The Slovak Republic was never in a position to block this loan either. However, as regards the actual resumption of oil flow through the Druzhba pipeline, this is truly a very important matter for us.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte said that the alliance is facing great dangers on multiple fronts, from the Arctic to the Mediterranean, from outer space to the seabed, from missiles and drones to sophisticated cyber attacks, Rutte added.
The dangers we are facing are great, from the Arctic to the Mediterranean, from outer space to the seabed, from missiles and drones to sophisticated cyber attacks. Russia's war against Ukraine rages on. China's military modernization and nuclear expansion, they continue. And Iran is spreading terror and chaos. And you feel this prominently here in Turkey. In recent weeks, NATO has successfully intercepted ballistic missiles heading to Turkey from Iran on 4 separate occasions. NATO is prepared for such threats and will always do what is necessary to defend Turkey and all allies.
A new chapter in space exploration is taking shape as NASA prepares to launch one of its most ambitious observations yet. With advanced capabilities and a faster timeline than expected, the mission represents a major advance in how scientists observe the universe.
NASA has introduced the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, a next-generation observatory designed to dramatically expand our view of the cosmos. The agency says the mission is now on track for an early September launch, months ahead of schedule and under budget.
We're now targeting an early September launch, 8 months ahead of schedule and under budget.
Named after NASA's first chief astronomer, Roman will build on the legacy of the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope, but with vastly greater speed and scale. Scientists say its ability to gather data will mark a major leap forward.
Hubble gathered 172 terabytes of data in its first 30 years. Roman will downlink 1.4 terabytes of science data every day.
The telescope is expected to unlock new discoveries across the universe, from distant galaxies to planets beyond our solar system.
Roman will discover tens of thousands of new planets outside our solar system. It will reveal billions of galaxies, thousands of supernova, and tens of billions of stars.
With its wide field of view and rapid surveying power, Roman is set to help scientists map the universe in unprecedented detail and deepen our understanding of how planetary systems form across the Milky Way.
The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing growing criticism from both the opposition and his own party amid the Peter Mandelson controversy. We now bring you the very latest from London with AnewZ's Ollie Barrett.
Well, Keir Starmer remains under significant pressure over the Peter Mandelson episode, and the opposition parties here in the UK continue to call for him to resign. But he used the Wednesday Prime Minister's questions session to try and make the argument that actually the events of recent days show that he did follow due process in all of this, and that he should have been provided more information during the vetting part of the process by the Foreign Office. It was that he sacked the former Chief Civil Servant Sir Ollie Robbins from his Foreign Office role. Ollie Robbins gave evidence to MPs on Tuesday and talked about the pressure he felt that the Foreign Office was under to get the approval of Peter Mandelson's appointment to the embassy in Washington over the line. The Prime Minister denied that that was the case, and Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives during PMQs, tried to push the Prime Minister on all of this. She didn't necessarily land any blows during their back and forth, but it was also notable during Prime Minister's questions that the support from the Labour benches behind Keir Starmer, from those members of his own party, was not full-throated. It was not loud. It seemed very, very subdued indeed. So this is a Prime Minister who remains under fire, insists he's going to be staying in his job, but as I say, doesn't seem to have that full-throated backing from his own party at the point. One of the things, though, keeping Keir Starmer in his job for now, despite the controversy over Peter Mandelson's appointment to Washington ambassador and later having to be sacked because of his links to convicted offender Jeffrey Epstein, is that we have a funny situation where you don't have a Labour Party which is coalescing around some other kind of candidate for the leadership. You don't have yet cabinet resignations which could really force the issue for the Prime Minister. We also have local elections coming up, so any candidate who might be thinking about a leadership challenge would probably rather do that after those local elections if Labour are going to perform very badly indeed. And that's why many analysts here in the UK say that Keir Starmer is a leader in office but not necessarily in power at the moment. He has been weakened over the controversy about that appointment of Peter Mandelson to become US ambassador, later having to be sacked. But for now, as I say, Keir Starmer very much remains in post, even if he doesn't appear to be a very strong leader of his own Labour Party at the moment. Ollie Barrett in London for AnewZ.
France is facing rising economic pressure from the Iran conflict as energy costs go up and public finances come under strain. The government is responding by freezing spending and offering targeted support while trying to avoid adding to inflation. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where France is now feeling the economic fallout from the Iran conflict. Officials say the crisis already cost the country between 4 to 6 billion euros, driven largely by soaring energy prices and sharply higher borrowing costs. Finance Minister Roland Lescure says rising debt servicing alone is adding around 3.6 billion euros to the budget as markets react to prolonged instability in the Middle East. That pressure is being felt across the economy. Higher oil prices are feeding directly into fuel, transport, and production costs, raising concerns about a renewed wave of inflation just as price growth had started to ease. In response, France will freeze 6 billion euros in spending to offset the impact and try to keep France's deficit under control, already one of the highest in the Eurozone. At the same time, targeted support measures will be rolled out to shield the most exposed sectors, including fishing, farming, and transport, as well as low-income workers who depend heavily on their cars. But officials are under pressure from both sides of the political spectrum, with calls for broader fuel tax cuts and energy price caps, demands the government has so far resisted, warning that untargeted support could fuel inflation and further strain public finances. Across Europe, the picture is similar. Higher energy prices, rising bond yields, and tightening fiscal space, all complicating efforts to support growth. For France, the message is very clear. This is no longer just an energy shock, but a fiscal one, forcing difficult trade-offs between protecting households, supporting industry, and maintaining budget discipline as the economic ripple effects of the crisis deepen. For AnewZ, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Tensions are rising between Iran and the European Union as Tehran sharply criticises calls for further sanctions following recent regional developments. Well, the exchange highlights deepening divisions at a time when diplomatic channels remain strained.
The Iranian embassies in the UK and Austria have strongly criticised the remarks by the EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas on imposition of wider sanctions on Tehran following its retaliatory measures in the region after the joint US-Israeli war on Iran. According to the state-owned IRNA news agency, the London embassy said in a post on its social platforms on Wednesday, "Let's talk about the European highway of hypocrisy. 168 Iranian school children massacred, bridges targeted, water infrastructure destroyed. EU response, none. EU action, sanction the victim. This is the new Berlin Wall of morality." It added, "Iran says Hormuz Strait is open. US says it is closed and impounds ships. EU response, silence. US Navy targets Dena warship for fun. Sailors killed. EU response, silence. ICC arrest warrants for Israeli officials. EU response, visits and hugs." In a stern criticism, the embassy also accused the European bloc of double standards, saying the Green Continent has sold its honor and issued the bill to the name of the Iranian students killed by the US air raids on a primary school in Minab, southern Iran. According to IRNA, the statement was made following the EU Foreign Policy Chief accusing Iran of reckless U-turns on Tuesday, 21st of April. Also in Vienna, the Iranian mission warned that the repetition of any aggressive and provocative action, including the imposition of further sanctions, will have severe consequences for Europe. While Tehran and EU are already at loggerheads over the bloc's triggering reinstallment of UN nuclear sanctions in 2025, the Iranian mission said any future dialogue with Iran must be conducted with a rational, realistic, and utmost respect approach. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, for AnewZ.
Strains are emerging in EU-Turkey relations after remarks by Ursula von der Leyen prompted criticism from European lawmakers. Well, the reaction highlights sensitivities around Ankara's role as both a key partner and a geopolitical actor. Adam Morrow has more from Istanbul.
A senior European Parliament official has criticized comments by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that appeared to group Turkey alongside Russia and China as sources of influence on Europe. Nacho Sanchez Amor, the European Parliament's rapporteur on Turkey, described the remarks as geopolitically flawed in a statement posted Tuesday on social media. It's totally inconsistent with recurrent signals for stronger cooperation on security and defense, he said. The criticism came after von der Leyen said that the European Union, quote, must succeed in completing the European continent so that it is not influenced by Russia, Turkey, or China. The comments, which she made over the weekend, raised eyebrows in Ankara and in European policy circles, given Turkey's status as a long-standing NATO ally and EU candidate country. Relations between the EU and Turkey have been complex in recent years. While they have been marked by cooperation on migration, trade, and security, tensions persist over certain political and regional issues. Turkey remains a key partner for the European bloc, especially in terms of managing migration flows and shoring up NATO's southeastern flank. Ankara, for its part, has yet to issue an official response to the European Commission President's remarks. In an apparent effort to diffuse tensions, an EU spokeswoman later clarified that von der Leyen's reference to Turkey was not intended as a direct comparison with Russia or China. Speaking to Bloomberg late Tuesday, she said the comment reflected recognition of Turkey's size and geopolitical clout in the region. The spokeswoman went on to stress that Turkey remains an important economic and political partner, describing the country as an important NATO ally. This is Adam Morrow for AnewZ in Istanbul, Turkey.
Brussels is pushing forward with new trade and energy routes, bypassing global instability, focusing on the middle corridor. But Georgia's crucial role is now in doubt due to its domestic policies. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili has more.
At a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Luxembourg on April 21st, Enlargement Commissioner Marta Koos laid out a clear priority. Europe is rapidly advancing its connectivity agenda, focusing on alternative trade and energy routes that bypass unstable corridors. With northern routes disrupted by Russia's war in Ukraine and southern routes affected by tensions involving Iran, Brussels is turning towards what is known as the Middle Corridor, a network linking Europe to Central Asia through the South Caucasus. But the key detail is this. Current EU engagement is actively moving forward with Armenia, Azerbaijan and Turkey, countries where concrete projects are already underway. Koos made it clear that connectivity today is not theoretical. It is about infrastructure, energy grids and functioning trade routes. Projects are being financed, partnerships deepened and strategic alignment accelerated. At the same time, Marta Koos acknowledged a critical reality. It is impossible to talk about a real connectivity agenda without Georgia. The country remains geographically essential, a natural transit bridge between Europe and Asia. In fact, EU-backed energy projects already link Armenia to Georgia, highlighting its structural importance. However, there is a growing gap between potential and participation. Georgia's role now depends not only on geography but on political alignment. Koos noted that EU engagement can only go as far as Georgia itself is willing to cooperate. This comes amid increasingly strained relations between Tbilisi and Brussels, driven by controversial domestic policies and critical rhetoric from the Georgian government toward the EU. The result is a geopolitical paradox. At a moment when global instability creates a rare opportunity for Georgia to become a major transit hub, fulfilling a long-standing strategic ambition, the country appears less integrated into the very projects shaping that future. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, AnewZ.
Now, a regional pact set to supercharge Central Asian trade. Uzbekistan, Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan have agreed to streamline transit routes and bolster regional connectivity. Sevil Rajapova has the details on what this means for the economy.
Uzbekistan, Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan have agreed to create a joint working group aimed at facilitating transit trade and the export of Afghan products. The agreement was reached during a trilateral meeting on the sidelines of the INAPROM Central Asia Industrial Exhibition. Representatives from the three countries' economic and trade ministries discussed expanding business cooperation, launching joint projects and improving regional logistics. A key focus was placed on diversifying transport routes, particularly as Afghanistan continues to reduce reliance on traditional corridors. The move comes amid growing regional trade. Trade between Afghanistan and Central Asia reached approximately $2.7 billion in 2025, with a target of increasing this figure to $10 billion in the coming years. Bilateral trade between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan has also expanded significantly, rising to around $1.68 billion in 2025, up 2.5 times compared to 2021. Large-scale infrastructure projects are also supporting this trend. Uzbekistan is advancing the Trans-Afghan Railway Initiative, a proposed 573-kilometer corridor linking Central and South Asia, expected to reduce cargo delivery times and expand transit capacity. In parallel, construction of the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway began in 2025, further strengthening regional connectivity. To support these developments, the three countries plan to coordinate tariff policies and introduce digital systems to simplify transit procedures and improve cross-border efficiency. The initiative is expected to strengthen trade flows, improve access to regional markets, and position Central Asia as a key transit hub, connecting major economic corridors across Asia. It is Yulia Rajabova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, AnewZ.
Kazakhstan says oil shipments to Europe through Russia have come to a halt, raising fresh concerns over energy flows to the EU. Transit via the Druzhba pipeline appears to have dropped to zero, with no formal explanation from Moscow so far. Our correspondent reports now from Almaty.
Reports of a halt in the transit of Kazakh oil to Europe are now being confirmed at the government level. Kazakhstan's energy minister Erlan Akınjanov says shipments to Germany via Russia through the Druzhba pipeline have effectively dropped to zero for May. While there has been no formal confirmation from Moscow, the minister says unofficial data points to a complete halt in flows along the Atrau-Samara route toward the refinery in Schwedt, Germany. Russian sources, also speaking unofficially, cite a lack of technical capacity to continue pumping Kazakh oil. Authorities in Astana suggest this may be linked to recent damage to infrastructure, while this remains an assumption instead of a confirmed cause. There is no confirmed timeline for when flows might resume. Kazakh officials say transit could restart once technical issues are resolved, but for now there is no clarity beyond May. The situation is drawing close attention as the Druzhba pipeline remains a key export corridor supplying oil to Europe. Kazakh crude accounts for roughly 20 to 30% of demand at the Schwedt refinery. In total, around 3 million tons of Kazakhstan's annual oil exports are typically shipped via this route, while in 2025 volumes stood at 2.1 million tons. And amid the disruption, Kazakhstan has already begun redirecting part of its oil exports to alternative routes, seeking to minimize the impact on its position in the European market. The country has been supplying oil to Germany via the Druzhba pipeline since 2023, and until now this route had been considered a stable export channel. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, AnewZ.
China and Canada have agreed to significantly expand their air connectivity. Well, the deal will double cargo flights and allow for more passenger services, aiming to meet surging demand for trade and travel. Our correspondent Manuel Makdoum now brings us the full report.
China and Canada have agreed to expand air connectivity, increasing both passenger and cargo capacity to support rising trade and travel demand. Under the arrangement, each side will be permitted to operate up to 20 cargo flights per week, doubling the previous cap of 10. The agreement also provides for a phased increase in passenger services, including the addition of more direct routes and higher flight frequencies between key cities. The move also follows a period of high-level engagement between the two countries, including recent diplomatic exchanges aimed at stabilizing bilateral ties and restoring regular transport links disrupted in recent years. Cargo operations are expected to focus on high-value and time-sensitive goods such as electronics, industrial components, medical supplies, and perishables, improving delivery times and supply chain efficiency. The expansion comes as international aviation continues to recover, with both countries seeking to strengthen trade links and facilitate business and tourism flows. While no exact timeline has been publicly confirmed for the full rollout, officials indicate that the increases will be implemented gradually, subject to regulatory approvals and airline scheduling. Manu Maktoum, AnewZ, Beijing.
Afghanistan's Baghlan province is receiving an influx of families forced to return from neighbouring countries, Iran and Pakistan. Well, this is putting additional pressure on communities already struggling with limited resources and food insecurity. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis reports now from Baghlan.
I am in Baghlan, where families who have returned from Iran and Pakistan are trying to restart their lives with very little. Many come back with few belongings, no stable income, and uncertainty over where they will live, how they will feed their children, and whether any support will last beyond the first days of return. Afghanistan is facing one of the world's largest return movements. The UN Refugee Agency says around 5.4 million Afghans have returned from Iran and Pakistan since October 2023, with 2.9 million returning in 2025 alone. Aid agencies warn the scale of returns is pushing already fragile services to the limit.
When we returned from Pakistan, it was raining heavily. We had children with us, and we had to stay at Umari camp for 2 days. One for my family, and the other for my son and his family, who live separately. Not only us, but in the Kelagai area, more than 200 families have returned from neighbouring countries. In areas such as Puli Kumli, Kenjan, and Karkar, no one has received any support since returning. Until now, we do not have proper accommodation or emergency supplies. Most of the walls are destroyed, and we have covered the rooms with tarps.
The humanitarian picture is already severe. UNICEF says 21.9 million people in Afghanistan, including 11.6 million children, will need humanitarian assistance this year. WHO say 14.4 million people will need health assistance, while aid groups warn malnutrition is worsening among children.
It was during the cold winter days that we came back, and when we arrived, we stayed in a refugee camp. It was raining and snowing when we arrived, and we had women and children with us. Because of the rain and snow, the children and even I became sick. We faced many hardships. During our journey back, we also experienced many difficulties.
For families here, the crisis does not end at the border. The challenge is reintegration, finding work, shelter, healthcare, and enough food in communities that are already under pressure. The UN says women and children make up most of the latest assisted returns, and agencies warn that without more support, many families could fall deeper into poverty. A new UN Women report says only 17% of Afghan women returnees from Iran and Pakistan are earning an income. The study found many women returned with skills, but face shrinking job opportunities and lack of tools or capital to start again.
When the returnees came back from Pakistan, they were initially supported with cash by the Islamic Emirate. The number of those who returned to Kelagai village in Baglan province is around 930 to 950 families. These poor people are facing many challenges, and we urge international organizations and countries to support them. Most of them are living in tents, while some are staying with us in our homes. They arrived during the winter, and we supported them as much as we could. We hope they will be able to build their own homes, but unfortunately, they are not able to rebuild at this time. They are facing difficulties in almost every area of life, including access to health centers and educational facilities. We ask governments to support these people, as they are dealing with many hardships. Most of them have also suffered from floods. We urge the international community to support them.
Afghan authorities say support is being provided in areas such as transport, housing, healthcare and food. But with returns continuing and aid funding under pressure, many families in places like Baglan say survival, not recovery, remains their immediate goal.
Well, that is all for Prime Time for tonight. Please do join us again tomorrow night, though, for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at AnewZ, thanks for watching.